this is Alice Emerson, and I am with Divorce to Recovery, Divorce Coaching, and I have Frank Mannino with me. And Frank, hey, how are you? Frank is with, good morning. Frank is the Director of Financial Planning at One Wealth Advisors, and we're going to talk today about divorce and finances and financial planning. Always a fun topic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's complex and fun.
Yes. Well, I mean, these are both touchy, and we kind of talked about this before, a little touchy subjects on their own, right? People talking about divorce and people talking about their finances and financial planning. So put these two together, and, I think this deserves the attention that we're going to give it briefly, and then have people be able to follow up with myself or with you if they have any further questions. But yeah, so tell us a little bit, like you're an open book about your divorce and how you guys handled it, which is pretty unusual for a lot of people, but I like people to know that this is possible. So give us a little information on your story.
Well, it's definitely it's an unusual story, but I guess it would be good if more people did it this way. I get a lot of compliments from people on how we handled things and how we kind of kept everything very fluid. But ultimately, people ask why we got divorced. I give them the answer: we had irreconcilable differences. And they say, come on, everybody says that, right? But that's actually the case. We just, we didn't get along very well living in the same house after a while. And the relationship was probably over years before we ever decided to get divorced, which is also probably the case with most people. And at one point, it just it came down to the level of toxicity that was ever sort of present in the house. I came from a divorced family. It was a traumatic thing for me because of the way my parents handled it. And I never wanted to do that to my children. So I hung on for a while. Mm-hmm. But then there came a point in time where I realized that staying together was actually more traumatic for them than if we had gotten divorced. I think separation was the solution. It wasn't just staying together, for the sake of the kids, because neither one of us could bite our tongues, and it was just kind of a miserable situation. You could feel it in the air. It was like lead, just kind of hanging there. So
that's actually really important to point out, that some people really do stay for the children, and that's honorable, and I come from a divorced family as well, and you really don't want to be that person anymore. You worked really hard, and you have these children that you're responsible for, and sometimes afterwards, the children will probably agree that they know what's going on, and it's affecting them, and that fighting and the tension, and like you said, the lead, the weight of it affects them, their schoolwork, and their personality, and their view on relationships. So that in itself, is pretty interesting that you had that awareness. And then
it may have been like slightly in hindsight, I think, but ultimately, that's the conclusion that we kind of came to, was that, we were better off. Everybody was better off with us being apart, the married couple part anyway.
So when you did separate and, started working on your divorce, did the lead kind of lighten a little bit? And from what I understand, the conversations about separating were not as traumatic as it was when you were living together. So does that make sense?
No. Yeah, well, the lead lifted immediately. It was a big relief for the both of us. The hardest part of the whole thing was telling the kids. That was the most emotional and toughest part. And, it was for everybody involved. I recall the dinner, we took them out. It was a sushi restaurant. And it was amazing to me, because the one thing that I kept focusing on was, I'm going to wake up in the morning and be alone. The kids aren't going to be there, at least half the time, right?
Yeah.
And that was the thing that kind of was the hardest thing for me, was this, I'm going to wake up in a house and there's not going to be anyone there. What's that going to be like? And I remember, having the conversation, and then the first thing they cried. And the first thing my daughter said was, Daddy's not going to be there in the morning. Which is pretty insightful for an 8-year-old at that point. And so that was, the hardest, I think the hardest part. And then, but otherwise, it was a pretty clean break after that.
I just want to just pause for a second there. You said that she was 8 at the time, right? How old were your children when you had this? I mean, because you have 2, a son and a daughter, right? Okay. So what were their ages then, and what are their ages now?
So they were, so my daughter was 8, my son was 2012. His birthday is 2000, so it's always the year that's his age. So it was 2012, so he was 12. And now they're 20 and 16.
Wow. Isn't that amazing? And it was so hard to give that news then. And yet. Yeah. So
well, what ended up happening? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so from that point, I mean, everybody struggles with that, right? Telling the children and, what's it going to look like, that lonely feeling in the morning of not hearing their voices and running to your room. And I mean, we get it. And a lot of people stay because they can't see what you're about to describe, which is life after divorce. And then in addition to that, the financial part, but go ahead and explore that that time.
Well, as far as so the emotional part of it, ended up not being nearly as bad as I thought it would. And in fact, I like waking up sometimes and not having anyone there, to be honest with you. It's I don't mind my solitude, to be quite honest. It's fine. And they're fine too. I think one of the tricks that I used was something, I saw in a movie called Life is Beautiful. I don't know if you saw it, but it's an Italian movie. Roberto Benigni's an Italian Jew. He gets sent to a concentration camp with his child, and he plays a game. He fools the kid into thinking that it's all a big game. You have to see the movie. Anyway.
I have seen it, and I'm trying not to cry. I have seen it.
No, don't cry. No, it's the ending is sad, but it's like what he went through to try to ease the blow for his kids was amazing, right? Not a true story, but still a great story nonetheless. That was kind of what I did, and the way I tricked them was I had them looking for apartments with me when I moved out. I said, help me pick out furniture. This is going to be, you're just going to have 2 houses now. You get to decorate, a room now. We're going to be, I also got an apartment very close to one of the ice cream shop that they really like. I said, we're going to be closer to the ice cream shop now. We can just roll out of bed and go get ice cream. So, I made that sort of a distraction.
Yeah.
And we were going to Bed Bath & Beyond and picking curtains and furniture. And they looked at apartments with me, and I made them part of the process, actually. It was just instinctual.
That's amazing. That's really keeping it child-centered, about their well-being and less about you just wanting to go off and start a new life and go party and blah, blah, blah. You really, you can actually get divorced and still be a family. It's just you're not a family together. And I think that is a dynamic that from what I know, that you and your former spouse, mother of your children, have been able to really kind of, nurture still that family environment, even though you're divorced.
Yeah. Big time.
And the way you guys kind of handled it was really somewhat rare, and maybe people just don't give enough attention to how you guys handled this. So kind with each other, and logical maybe might be another descriptive
Practical,
word.
logical.
Practical, yeah.
Absolutely.
So how
we took the emotion out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, I think we took, we took the emotion out of it. It's funny, I used to talk about Gandhi a lot, and how when they resisted the British, and the British were beating the Indians, and the Indians didn't fight back. And I remember having this discussion with my mother-in-law, who was my mother-in-law at the time, and she said, "Yeah, but that only works if you have a civilized enemy." And I thought, yeah, that actually makes sense. So in a way,
good point. Yes, good point.
I had a civilized enemy in my ex. I got lucky with that, and vice versa. She got lucky with me.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, like I said, we kept it child-centric. We took the emotion out of it. Neither one of us felt, scorned or wronged. It just didn't work, and 50 years ago, we would have stayed together and been miserable. Thank God for divorce. So, we just didn't.
Right. Like, I love marriage. Don't get me wrong. Like, I liked being a wife, and I didn't mind it at all. But it gets to the point where if it's unhealthy for your soul and those, children that you're responsible for, it's an unhealthy environment. Yes, I am very thankful that divorce is an option.
Yeah, it's an option. And especially, let's face it, a lot of it has to do with women being liberated, how many women stayed in, awful, abusive marriages just because they had nowhere else to turn, before. So
exactly. And you and your wife were both financially secure, and that may have been able to help with the logic behind it, the less of emotion, because you weren't tied to the desperate feeling that I know that I get with, some clients. There's that desperate feeling, how am I going to do this alone? Or even, men, how am I going to wake up without my children? There's those different emotional attachments. But financially speaking, you're right. There are a lot of women, but there's still a lot, another huge segment of the population that they have not created for themselves that security for being able to financially dissolve
right.
a marriage.
So they have to fight like an animal backed into a corner, as I like to put it, because that's really what it boils down to. If you don't have the financial wherewithal, and you've been reliant on another person, then you have to fight like an animal to get, especially if you have someone that's not reasonable.
Not civilized, as your ex-mother-in-law would say. If you don't have a civilized enemy who sees your work.
That doesn't work.
Right. And there are feminists, and then there's a whole group of women that are not feminist, right?
Yeah.
Believe it or not, that does exist, and it doesn't make one better than the other. There are women who still want to have the door open for them, and who don't mind supporting their spouse's career, and being at home with the children, raising them, and still can still have a retirement plan, right? And that's okay. And then there are other women who would be like, oh, hell no. Like, I am working forever and you stay home or hire a nanny or whatever. Like, they just definitely are not going to put themselves in a position of being what they would deem as needy, right?
Vulnerable, yeah.
Vulnerable, right. Everybody, that's a huge word, right? And a huge position to be in,
It's not an enviable position,
Right. And so they are very vulnerable. Now, there are some things that they can still do. Like, you can still be that stay-at-home mom and still have, your education. You can still have a job a career, and you can still have some financial planning that your
Totally.
that your financial advisor, like, and this is what you help people with, is, you know, planning their future, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, be honest with you, most of our clients are two working, you know, have two incomes. They're dual income. Some aren't, you know, and in a lot of cases, it's in, you know, the older clients. But I think one interesting factoid that most people don't realize is that even if a woman isn't working, she can still contribute to an IRA.
Exactly.
As a, you know, it would be a spousal IRA. You can still put up to, you know, $6,000 into an IRA, or $7,000 if you're over 50, even though you're not working, which is, you know, it's an important piece of information. But there are, you know, ways that a woman can secure her financial future despite not having a career.
Exactly. And there's a larger population of stay-at-home dads as well. So this goes just with a spousal, like you said, you know, a spousal IRA. And some people choose to maybe invest in property and that sort of thing. So I just think it's a great conversation that you and your wife, neither one of your ex-wife were in that vulnerable position where you had to fight like an animal, right?
Yeah.
To be able to, you know, keep the assets. And I think it was a nice conversation as well when maybe one was maybe getting a little bit more than the other. That says a lot about you guys as human beings, that, you know, you really kept it centered as to, you know, the ultimate goal, right? With and you had mentioned the 7 habits of highly effective people, right?
I did, yeah.
And most people only look at that in a business sense, and with the end in mind, right? You start with the end in mind, and you kind of use that focus here.
I did, and you know, I think you nailed it. You know, it doesn't only apply to business. I mean, being effective, you know, is multifaceted, right? Life is multifaceted. Some people are very effective in business and horrible, you know, in their personal lives, right? But I believe, you know, that it's kind of, you know, things of that nature, you know, being highly effective is universal. You can be effective, you know, in all different facets of your life. And so beginning with the end in mind is helpful. When I was a high school administrator, you know, that was what I would always talk to kids about in terms of, you know, being the number one factor in modifying behavior is to, you know, focus on the goal. You know, a kid would get sent to my office for, you know, disrupting class, for example. And I would say, listen, you know, if getting a good grade or being on the principal's list is your goal, is that your number one priority, and that's really all you're focused on, then all the other stuff will fall into place. It just will, because you'll be aware of all the behaviors and all the distractions that are going to knock you off your goal, right? So all of a sudden, you know, if you're like, I'm getting on the principal's list, the guy next to you trying to talk to you while the teacher's lecturing is no longer important, because he doesn't, you know, fit into the equation anymore.
Right, it comes to tunnel vision.
Yeah, and then so everything that you do gets filtered through that. It goes through that filter, and if it doesn't help you achieve the goal, or if it doesn't, you know, enhance, or if it detracts, it, you know, it goes away. It gets, you know, becomes extinct.
That's interesting. I love that. And I love that that you just brought up your education background, you know, being, you know, an administrator in education.
I did it for so long. I can't not, it's part of me. It's part of who I am.
That's awesome, because I'm sure, I know in my world, I get people who aren't, you know, as financially knowledgeable about investments and that sort of thing. So I can imagine that background just really enhances the way you can speak to clients at different levels and what their goals are. and
Yeah.
helping them kind of have that tunnel vision. So
Yeah, absolutely. It does. And that's kind of how we approach, financial planning. I mean, you mentioned being well versed in investments and yeah, investments are important, but let's be honest. I mean, the market is pretty perfect. When we talk about efficiency, the information's there. I'm not saying that putting together a very, well-crafted portfolio isn't important, but the delta between that and just throwing all your money into some, broad-based mutual fund isn't that high. It's not that there's not that much disparity. So, yes, investments are important, but really what drives the whole plan is what your goals are. If your goal is to retire in 10 years, that's going to drive everything else. So it's really like, it's a similar kind of behavior. It's the end. The end is going to dictate, the means, right? The ends justify the means.
Excellent. Yeah. So I love that approach, and I really do appreciate, and I do that with the divorce coaching as well. Like, how do you want to show up, later in life, and how do you want your children to view you, and that sort of thing. And so I like the way that you approach your business, but I mean, it's part of who you are as well. And it's been proven even in your relationships, with your children, and they're doing well now. Everybody's well and well adjusted.
It appears that way.
It appears that way. Like the jury is still out for some, right? Like mine, I have 3 and they're of, 22, 20 and 16. So everybody seems to be adjusting well, and that gives hope for people, eventually in our lives, you have to have, how do you want to be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? How do you want to show up tomorrow? Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't always
Absolutely.
have to, right. It depends on a certain circumstance. So just the way that you have approached living and doing business as well, I think there's a huge market, and I would love to be able to also send, people your way. Even though you're in Philadelphia, you also have, offices in California, but you can see people from anywhere, correct? Like we have Zoom, we're doing now. But
absolutely. In fact, we haven't seen a live client since March.
Huh.
I mean, none of us, so. And what we're finding is that, we don't actually need to, which is kind of crazy. People like that face-to-face. We love it, but it's actually more efficient if I don't have to drive half an hour to a client's home or to meet them at a restaurant. We get more done. Our business is actually thriving during this. I feel actually bad saying that because I know so many people are struggling. But we've grown leaps and bounds. We're bringing on new clients all the time, and our assets under management have grown like exponentially since this all began. It's crazy.
Congratulations, that's great.
Thanks.
And with the amount of travel that has lessened in just about every single industry, the environment improves, and of course being part of the holistic chamber of commerce, that always makes me happy to see us save our environment as well. So
totally,
it's great that it's been able to do that, and like you said, just save that extra time of travel, and
that hour that you going back and forth is now you're producing something else, whatever that might be. And so it's been an eye opener. That's, for sure. It's been, we have few people in our practice that are like old school, they like to see people, and they would never have bought, into this, but they had to. They were forced to. And once we did it, it was like ripping off the Band-Aid, it was like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought. Okay. I guess we can do
change,
this,
Change in all parts of our lives is really sometimes forced upon us. And there are some people that are in, divorce and financial situations where it's been forced upon them and they've had to do something. And it's opened up this whole new world, like you just said, with, some of your old school, other planners. And it's like, okay, that wasn't so bad after all. Whether it's investing in finances or whether it's time to consider talking to a financial planner about maybe do's and don'ts and how to get to the next stage of your life. And maybe some people are even just considering divorce, and how can they start? Maybe they don't really want a divorce, but they want to make sure that they're set up so they're not in such a vulnerable situation. That, contacting you, a financial planner and wealth advisor, would actually be a very smart move, I would think.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
And then
it's, well, oftentimes it's not just a simple matter of, splitting assets, especially depending on what state you live in. The rules change. California's community property, and then we have places like, well, not California that aren't. And that changes things also. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's best to contact a financial planner, CPA, estate attorneys. It becomes a team effort in terms of that. But there's a lot of advice to be given and to be gotten, certainly, in that realm.
Yes, and I rely heavily on the experts. I have a list of referral people that I use during coaching to really guide people to get to the right people. Even when I'm referring attorneys, if they decide to go that route, finding the right fit for my client is so important, because it's navigating some pretty, broad waters, and so it's nice to know when somebody can actually, their situation fits with the skill set of the financial or, legal counsel as well. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I appreciate you taking time, to share your story and your skills. And I'd love to be able to, do a follow-up and maybe even, talk about the do's and don'ts or specific things that you want to, that we could narrow in on and get into.
Totally.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, we barely scratched the surface here today, not just in terms of me personally, but in terms of, obviously financial planning as well. And each time we talk about, some other facet, that just opens up a whole new door of discussion. We could do this all day. So yeah, of course, we should follow up. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything else? I'll share all of your contact information, but I really like the idea of how you handled in your ex, or some people like to call it co-parent, some people call it former spouse, some people just say mother, father of my child, it depends, but your ex, and you really, I would like to see more people be able to logically and less emotionally handle a divorce a little bit more like business. And that's basically what a coach does. A lot of people don't even know that divorce coaches are out there. But what we do is we buffer the emotion so that they can show up and do the business of divorce.
Yeah. And that's not so easy, let's face it, but that's why you're there. That's what you do.
Yeah, but some people have the wherewithal to do that, and like you said, are not in that vulnerable position of being emotionally charged, but it's getting to the business. So kudos to you guys for doing that, and thank you for sharing it. And I hope to help more people to be able to show up in that fashion.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to share, and if some information that I give you helps other people achieve peace, that's just buying my way into heaven a little bit more.
Yeah,
right?
That's what we call it, right? That ripple effect. That was part of my meditation this week, and I was out near the water, and people can tune out at this point or tune in. But the interesting part was this tiny little turtle just poked its head up and then saw me and then went back down. But it created this huge ripple throughout the whole lake. It was so beautiful, and it just made me think about that, like what kind of effect do we want to have on the world. And that's why I do what I do. And I know it just makes you feel like a little bit more of I don't know, part of the whole world and making it a better place. So
absolutely. And the energy that we put into it is really impactful. in both ways, good and bad. So I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So, well, we'll just continue. We'll say that this will be continued, and then we'll come up with additional, focused topics as well. But thank you for sharing and letting people get to know you as a person, and your basic outlook on how you want to approach business and helping people ultimately. Yeah.
Well, thank you
very much. Yeah. So I'll get your contact information as well from your card and post your website and all here. And we'll talk soon. Thank you, Frank.
All right, Alice. Take care.
All right. Here.
Bye.
Bye.